So, welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce Benji Thomas. Benji is a writer, film director, and creative producer based in London. Benji is also the founder of Bestie, a creative studio, advertising agency, and production company built around the idea that everyone has something worthwhile to say. And I find that very powerful, Benji. Benji is also a recovering alcoholic, addict, and his experience coming back from rock bottom informs and dictates the way he sees the world and the social and community impact of what he does and the stories that would otherwise go untold. So, welcome, Benji, and thank you for joining me on Stories Seldom Told.
Thank you.
So, when we're talking about this podcast, Stories Seldom Told, as you already know because you've heard some of my interviews and so on, I'm asking people to share their stories, and my introduction about you has already begun to tell us a little bit about me. So tell us a little bit more.
So I think my job day to day is telling stories, whether it's telling stories on behalf of a brand in a commercial, or whether it's telling stories that come from a page or any other way. It's kind of, the word storyteller is overused by filmmakers, I think, but actually it's one of those things that is maybe one of the most fundamental human experiences. It's story. And I actually often find myself saying on set that everyone wants to be like a visuals guy, everyone wants to be a camera guy, everyone wants to be aesthetics, but actually what happened to the story guys? What happened to the, like, in film nowadays, possibly because of Instagram, possibly because of other things, everyone cares about framing, and obviously I care a lot about that, but it's stories that really get you going, I guess.
And it is, I couldn't agree more, because I mean, you're doing something very different to what I'm doing, and yet what is influencing me is my story, your story. What is it, my story, that has made me who I am today?
Yeah.
And why am I doing what I am? And I have many stories to share, but this is not my platform, this is yours. So to start from the beginning, Benji. You talk about the fact that you're a recovering alcoholic and addict. Two different things to begin with, in my opinion, in my limited opinion. But start from your childhood, perhaps, and your path, so that for those of us who don't understand what these two words even mean, what does that look like?
So there's always been, well, as far as I'm aware, there's been addiction in my family for quite a long time, and I think that I grew up in the church, and you're aware of this, but the listeners won't be, and it's that there's a lot of stigma around alcohol, particularly in the church, and particularly in kind of the evangelical, kind of very brethren side of Christianity. Very, I would say, church-based more than faith-based, but I guess that's something that's a conversation for another day. But there's always this kind of taboo around it, and then therefore I believe that people can be genetically predisposed to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that it goes into nature versus nurture, where I don't know if it would have got as bad as it did if I had lived differently to how I did. I'll never know. But just to pick up on when you said the difference between alcoholic and addict, and that's one of those things where I identify as both, and you've obviously got two of the major things for addicts and alcoholics is AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous. And actually, the Narcotics Anonymous teaches that alcohol is a drug, and the way that it treats all the different drugs is the same. And it's my drug of choice, as they call it, was alcohol. So in that sense, I'm an addict, and I have experienced lots of other drugs and stuff like that. But the thing that got me was alcohol. I worked in bars. I joined the music industry quite young. I spent a lot of time in nightclubs. I DJ'd a lot, and my first ever job actually was working in the only corner shop in my local area that sold alcohol underage. I worked there on Fridays and Saturdays, and I wasn't.
And how old were you at this point?
12, 13, something like that.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, it was my first ever job, aside from like babysitting my little cousins or something. Actually, they might not have been born yet. But yeah, so it was Tony or Tilak. It was his shop, and I worked there on Fridays and Saturdays, and I wasn't that popular at school, but when you kind of have a monopoly on alcohol sales for all of the parties on the Friday and Saturday night,
For
suddenly,
underage children.
yeah, suddenly you're invited to more of the house parties. And I got paid, I think it was like 20 quid and a pack of tobacco and a drink of choice. And that was, yeah, even now I'm looking upon it fondly. It's one of the things, I guess. And it's it's hard to know whether the path led to the rest of the path or whether I was seeking it out, because I can't really picture either of my brothers working there. And so then that's where it gets kind of not tricky. That's where I guess it's like I don't know. I I wonder if I'd grown up in the countryside, for example, whether I would have ended up where I did, and I don't think it would be exactly the same. But
You also mentioned the idea of nature and nurture.
yeah,
And I mean, we all talk about that, you know. You say that alcoholism, addiction is, you believe, is genetically predisposed to some degree.
I think so. Yeah,
And you also know that it is within your family, is what you've heard.
Yeah.
And therefore you've got that genetic predisposition.
Yes.
But then you've got the idea of what you were saying earlier on, which is about nature and nurture. So what does that mean to you?
so I guess nature versus nurture is the idea that is everything in our genetics, or are you a product of your upbringing and the experiences and contexts
But
you've had?
specifically in relation to what you're saying about
In
yourself.
my case, I think it's a bit of both. I think that when I moved to Australia, my grandmother had all these sayings that only she said, and these pronunciations of things she said. She was a wonderful Irish woman who grew up in Australia. And then when I moved to Australia, I stayed with her adopted brother. So she was adopted. She had 3 older brothers. And I stayed with him. I'd never really met him before that I remember or anything like that. And suddenly there's this very, very, very tall man saying all these things that I thought only grandma said. And in exactly the same tone. And actually, it doesn't prove nature versus nurture, but it is interesting to see that 2 people with the same upbringing but completely different genetics were so similar in their mannerisms, in their sayings, in also their kind of outlooks on life. Very much their specific brand of tough love, with more emphasis on the love than the tough, to be honest. But very, very similar, and that obviously came from their mother or their mother and father, or other
Sure.
aspects. Yeah.
But just to come back to you, Benji, so you know, from the age of 12, 13, you were you were drinking alcohol.
Yes.
Now that you look back, may I, just for the context of the listeners, how old are you today?
30.
So you're talking about 17 years ago,
Yeah.
and in the last 17 years, when you look back on your 13-year-old self or your 15-year-old self, at some point did you realize that you were an alcoholic, you were an addict? Did you know that, or were you just drinking and continuing to enjoy it? And how does it manifest as an addict rather than just somebody who enjoys a glass of wine or beer?
I had my first alcohol withdrawal seizure when I was, I think, 19, possibly 20. It was then I got sober when I was 27. So I knew I loved it. I knew that I was revolving my life around it. I think a good way of describing it is I took a year off drinking in 2020, and I was what's called in kind of recovery circles a dry drunk. I had all the reasons why I drank, because I wasn't doing therapy, didn't do anything like that, but I had all the reasons that made me want to drink without the actual drink that made it better. I did in 2020, and I actually ended up helping open up a cocktail bar in Brixton, and the owners. My plan was to go back to drinking in 2021, and that was supposedly all well and good. And we were doing a tasting early 2021 in January when it was all supposedly fine. And I did a shot of whiskey or something like that. And one of the owners, who was all on board with the plan, came and patted me on the shoulder and he said, "Benji, I know you're all fine and all of that, but the way you looked at that shot when you took that shot," and bear in mind, we'd been drinking all day. Not like heavily, but we've been doing tastings, all of that kind of thing. There wasn't a shortage. But it's like the way you looked at that shot, and if I was writing it, I'd say some sort of simile or metaphor, but I think he just said it, and he looks at it. I've seen that before. Be careful, mate. And that I don't know if that conjures up the look for you, but that's how I was from the very beginning. So I don't know whether I put a label on it that early on, but I definitely knew. Does that make sense?
It does
Yeah.
make sense, and it does conjure up things in my mind. But for those of us, because obviously for those of us who have not experienced it up close, either as a family member or themselves, can you explain to me, if there is an answer, because it shows my limited understanding of this whole idea of wanting to drink, because people try and make excuses for others who are alcoholic or addicted, and they say, oh, poor thing, X happened, this is why they've had to go down the path of drink, they've just lost themselves and so on. Is that usually the case, or was that the case with you?
So I'd say it's a coping mechanism, an unhealthy one, but one nonetheless. And I think it's quite normal for someone, if they've had a tough day at work, to have a glass of wine, maybe two, something like that. That's pretty normal. And so there's this societal want or need. It like alcohol chemically does relax you. And then so maybe there's a group of people who have a fundamental need to relax. Addiction, in my experience, in my opinion, is about control. Either trying to control your emotions, an inability to deal with things. I found when I got sober in 2020, quote unquote, was friends who had died, who I hadn't grieved for properly. They were in my mind constantly. And I think that's because it kind of puts a pause on the feelings. It dulls the feelings to an extent that when you do sober up, then you get to, say, grieve properly, which, if you're not really set up to do it, can lead you straight back on the
And are
path.
you saying that you lost friends through because they were alcoholics themselves? I mean, not many 20-year-olds would say friends who have died. Not many 20-year-olds know how have friends who have died. So that itself is unusual.
Yeah, the big, I don't want to say the big loss, because all loss is loss. There's one that sticks in my mind. Quite a high-profile friend of mine in the music world. I was in Sheffield, and my parents were visiting me, and we were having breakfast or something like that. And my mum said, "Oh," because I knew a lot of quite successful musicians, and my mum said, "Oh, did you hear about that rapper who died?" And I just had this sinking feeling that I knew exactly who it was, and I'm not going to name him, but I remember calling my dealer. I remember buying a bottle of Jameson, but I don't remember leaving breakfast. I don't remember anything after that, and I didn't grieve him properly till 2020. I mean, I posted Instagram stories and stuff like that, but that's not the same. And then in 2020, lost two other friends as well. So that was a nice little triple whammy. But it's one of those things where I think people tend to, I say misery loves company, but I think people gravitate towards energies, and there's something in most addicts, and I think addicts often tend to be quite intelligent, and of course I'd say that, but the ones I know, they've tended to be, I guess you often end up having to lie quite a lot, so that gets that muscle strong. And I think they're people who are looking for something. So people who, and eating disorders are not something that I know much about at all, so I'm not going to comment on them, but I know that a lot of people who have EDs will end up, say, taking up weightlifting or something like that after the fact, or they call it cross addiction, where you might get addicted to porn or sex and love addiction or something like that. And it's like this idea that you're seeking something because something's either not quite right in your own head, or something's not quite right in your own heart, or something's not quite there. And I would say for me that manifested most as anxiety, like palpable physical anxiety. I remember when I used to go to these parties when I was like the youngest one there by a long shot, actually down the road in Vauxhall, when you get from the Northern Line, no, it wasn't that, no, it was when you get from the train to the Victoria Line. So from the overground, above ground, you have to walk across a little bridge, across the road to change to the different station. And every time I was going down the escalators there, I would throw up a little bit in my mouth because I was so nervous about going out. And I did that most nights. And then I ended up with a decent a decent DJing career because of it, but also a crippling addiction. So I don't know if
You've said so many things to us, and I want our listeners to understand a little bit about Benji, the multi-talented. You talked about the fact that you were a DJ. You talked about the fact that you knew many people in the music industry. Tell us a little bit about your career alongside alcoholism, addiction, that you were developing, and from what age were you doing this?
So I was a composer or studied composition when I was still in school.
We're talking about music composition.
Classical composition. And then I started DJing, first of all at kind of actually gay clubs in Vauxhall when I was way too underage. And I kind of ended up in the music and nightlife scene, which to go into, I guess, would say is exactly how you imagine it. In terms of the drinking and the drugs, it's like it does what it says on the tin. And
how old are you here when you're going into the nightlife scene?
Properly full time, I would say I was 15. 15, yeah. But I dabbled from like 14. Like I kind of want to do a documentary series on some of the beautiful clubs that have closed in London, because I was talking to a friend of mine, Skinny, the other day, and I'd asked him to host a documentary for me. And he was like, "You were there more than me." And I was like, "Yeah, to be honest with you, yeah, and that one, and that one, and that one." And it's like one of those things where I was in music, but what I found was I was too young to monetize my creativity. The way I described it at the time was...
You didn't have the maturity, did you?
Yeah, not at all, not even slightly. And the way I described it is if I had a bad day at work in a normal 9 to 5, I would come home and play piano. What happens if you had a bad day at work playing piano? And so then I went to Australia and ran a radio station. And then...
Now, hang on, you make it sound so easy. People have been wanting to man radio stations all their lives. And you say, I went to Australia and manned a radio station.
So that was me trying to escape London.
But I understand that. Yeah. But I also want to understand Benji, the young man who went to Australia and manned a radio station. How do you do that?
So I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but I knew
How did you even land the job?
So I went before I had the job. I went...
you're what, 18 years old at this point?
Yeah, 18, I think, yeah. Just turned 18, I think. And yeah, I went over there, and it's quite hazy to me. It was like about a week where I was deciding what to do and where to go, and I'd kind of heard bits and bobs. But like in general, one of the things they talk about in addiction is doing a geographical. And I would say that and it's a form of denial. So there's lots of different forms of denial, and one is believing that the place is the problem, and often there are problems within the place. But the fact is I'd be an alcoholic wherever I went, and I knew in my heart that it was getting too much in London, but I didn't want to blame myself, and I decided to basically do a runner. Then when I was in Australia, I went to America, and then I came back to London. Then I went to university in York, even though I didn't have any A-levels, so I was doing like a foundation year, and then dropped out of that and started working in bars. And so like, if the point is I kept trying to run away, and the problem was me, or at least within me.
But you said earlier on, Benji, that if you go back to your 13-year-old self, for example, and that place where you could sell alcohol to underage young people, if you had grown up in the countryside, perhaps it would have been different. But you're now saying maybe it isn't about environment.
So that's what I was getting at, where it's like I wonder if it would have been different. And the fact is I think it might have been different drugs, or it might have been a different...
But it would still have been addiction of some kind.
Would be different, but I'm reasonably sure they have alcoholics in the countryside, and I think it's just I'd be doing drugs in a field rather than in a nightclub. Possibly, I don't know. Sure. Like, or it would have been that I would have, like, there's plenty of people who grew up in small towns who made their way to London. I could have just been one of them.
No, because you said something very important to my ears anyway. The fact that a lot of alcoholics, a lot of addicts think that the place is the problem.
Yeah.
And it's, it's got nothing to do with them. It's, because I am in London or I am in X place. And I've got all the advantages that is offered to me.
Yeah.
So, by going to the countryside, going to another country, I will manage. But in reality, that's not the case at all, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I've got a line in a screenplay I wrote, which I stole from my little brother, which is when he came to visit me in Australia. He goes, "You went around the world to find yourself. Turns out he's a prick too."
Say that again.
You went around the world to find yourself. It turns out he's a prick too.
Whoops. Yes.
Which is, yeah. I guess it's that. It's and I guess the final geographical that I did was to go to rehab just outside of Cape Town, and that kind of changed things for me.
And then which year was that?
That was 2023. I 3 years sober at the beginning of February this year.
And you decided on your own that this is what you wanted to do?
Yeah, because there's not really, like, I was talking to someone the other day, earlier this week. Often people come up to me and they ask about addicts in their life. Everyone knows someone who they either think should get sober, someone who has got sober, someone who needs to get sober, someone, maybe it's themselves, but often they're asking for a friend or a family member. And I think those around me probably wanted me to get sober for years. In fact, no, I know that. I don't need to say I think. And I was living in a condemned pub in Manchester. I had done another geographical. I'd finally got into the film industry, and I was working I think I was a runner at that point, and I did a big job for Gucci, which was more money than I'd been paid in my life, I think, at that point. It's hard work, but worth it. And then I basically went up north to visit some friends on a bender and decided to move there, leaving all my stuff in London. And that was that. And then I found a condemned pub in Manchester to live in. They were all party people, lovely people, like really, really lovely people. And they ended up asking me to leave, which it was the kind of place that if you knew it, you'd be surprised that someone could drink too much to live there. But it was probably, this is the story that I tell, that if I'm ever telling too many good if I'm ever glamorizing it, the way it really ended up before I got sober was, I could tell you the story of how I was directing a music video in Paris, and I came back for the edit, and I was cracking up in the edit, and then I just said to my mom, enough is enough, and I ended up on a plane to South Africa. But actually the end was kind of the months before that. So I'm living in this condemned pub, and they're all lovely, lovely people. And at night I would stay up and drink while everyone was asleep. And I wouldn't just drink my alcohol, I'd drink theirs too. And I would be too afraid to face them in the morning. So I would be hiding in my room all day. And I would eventually, Co-op nearby would close. Or would be about to close. Suddenly, I wasn't too afraid to leave my room. I would, whatever money I'd managed to kind of beg, borrow, steal in my room, I would kind of sprint out past everyone, go to the Co-op, buy a couple of however many litres of vodka I could afford, drink however much on the way back in the like 5-10 minute walk, and I would be able to face my housemates, rinse and repeat. And eventually they asked me to leave, and I was looking for somewhere else to live. I found somewhere that was like as a lodger somewhere in this weird flat. I never ended up going there because I hit the final rock bottom. I was, yeah, I don't even know. My mum would be the person to say this story, and but I think I just said I'm ready. I don't know if I even said what it was about. I mean, this would be the way that I would write it, at least. I don't know if that's actually what happened, but I think it actually is. Where I just said to my mum, I'm ready now. And she had been Googling rehabs for years. So I got on a plane, and then I ended up in South Africa. I had this vision of my last ever drink being a glass of South African wine in South Africa. And I wanted to kind of hitchhike it was like a 7 or 8 hour drive to the rehab from Cape Town. I was like, okay, I'm going to be giving up my freedom. So I'm going to one last thing. And anyway, I get there, my phone's dead from the flight, and my car's not working because I hadn't told my bank that I was traveling. And the rehab had sent someone to pick me up. This lovely, lovely man called Elton, and he was holding a sign. No, because I walked straight past him, and I'm not a rude person. I don't treat people like that at all. But I was determined. I was furious as well. And so I go straight past him. He didn't see me. He had a photo of me, but like I think it was just from my passport or something. And I had to go back, tail between my legs, and my car didn't work and my phone didn't work. And then I had to sit in a car with him for 7 or 8 hours as I was withdrawing. Ended up in intensive care. And before we were rolling, you mentioned that we've had power cuts and stuff before, and I don't know how many listeners have experienced regular power cuts, but my first experience of what they call in South Africa load shedding.
Load shedding, it's called the same in India.
Yeah.
Yes, load shedding.
I vaguely in the back of my mind knew about it, but let me tell you, when you're in intensive care
and there's load shedding,
and it's your first time hearing load shedding, you realise that the beeps in intensive care are covering up a whole lot of groaning. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh no, this is real now. And
how long were you in intensive care?
I was in intensive care for like 3 or 4 days, I think.
And then how long were you in rehab?
3 months. And yeah, it was.
And was that enough? 3 months?
Yeah.
And then you stayed on in South Africa, in Cape Town, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I would have been coming back to commercial season, 100-hour work weeks, staying on my parents' sofa. And I don't think that, and I wouldn't have really been able to even afford therapy in London at that stage. So I don't know if rehab would have worked if I come straight back to that. Kind of defeats the point. You're zen, you're healed, and also I did worry it was another geographical. I mean, it was kind of my
Well, that was in my mind, you see, because you ran away to Australia, you went to America, and I deliberately used the word ran away.
Yeah. Oh no, I used it too. Yeah.
And then of course Manchester, which is in the United Kingdom.
I've done Manchester. I've lived in South Africa, Australia, San Francisco, kind of New York, but that's the shortest time. Manchester, Sheffield, York, Liverpool, kind of. Birmingham for a tiny bit.
Yeah. So from 13 to 30, give or take, 13 to 27. Yeah. I beg your pardon. 2023 is when you went to South Africa. So 13 to 27, you were in and out of your own personal home, your parents' home, plus you were going to all these places. But I want to flag something else, Benji, that I'm wondering whether the listeners have picked up, because I have picked that up. You often mention mum. You mention the support of mum, and this is how I'm understanding it. So you have loving parents, and yet there's often a myth from where I'm sitting amongst people who are alcoholics and addicts. Oh, they have no family, they're all alone, they have no support, all of that. You have 2 loving younger brothers, and you have loving parents, and yet you went down this path of addiction. What's that about, do you think?
I think there's a lot of people who have, I think first of all, everyone knows that and I'm not saying this is the case in my case, but speaking for addicts in general, in terms of this misconception, it's just because something looks good on the outside doesn't always mean that it's incredible on the inside. But then also it can be, like, it doesn't take a lack of love to have a difficult home environment. Like, you could have a lot of illness in your family. You could have, like a parent who's absent, for example, because of no fault of their own, or a parent who's absent because of a deliberate lack of love. There's a type of therapy called schema therapy. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's you did mention in one of your podcasts about how was it a podcast or a TED Talk? I did my research, but it's the idea that everything happens when you are a very small child, so kind of 0 to 3. That's right. I think it is. Yeah. And schema therapy revolves around that. So it's like if you people have different schemas, and I found it really, really helpful. But it's like a parent, a 2-year-old child doesn't know why mum's not there. You can find out later on, and it can help you reach that conclusion, or you can kind of make your peace with it, for want of a better term. But how a 2-year-old interprets things doesn't necessarily mean that. And I don't know if that's the cause for me or anything like that, but I think in general, the thing that has got me sober, and the thing that has kept me sober, and the thing that will keep me sober, is a surrender, a
Surrender. You use the word surrender.
Surrender, and it's a word that people familiar with recovery circles will be quite familiar with. But this kind of leads me on to the way I like. There's a load of other things that happen in between, and it's a conversation for another day, I guess. Although on my first or second shoot in South Africa, I was very, very anxious, and it was very frustrating being anxious after that long in rehab, because you're doing it for the anxiety to a certain extent. Like, this is why I used to drink. Why am I still feeling like this? And I was worried everyone could tell. And then one of my, if not my best friend in the world now, this very big, dreadlocked African man, Brent Sauls, my dear, dear friend, but at this point he was just a scary gaffer. He comes up to me. The gaffer's the head electrician on a set, and he comes up to me, and he had a reputation as well, and he comes up behind me and goes, "Have you ever had a problem with substance abuse?
You're on a
the
set.
worst possible thing happens, basically. I'm worried people are going to notice." And he still
And
doesn't
someone
know.
does notice.
Well, no, he says he doesn't know. He said call it. I asked him today, and he said call it God, call it intuition. And I don't know what he means by that. You'll have to ask him one day. But that's where it comes in, because the serenity prayer, which is the forefront of kind of NA meetings and stuff like that, is God, grant me to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to accept God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
And when I first heard that, I was like, I can change anything. Because I was the runner who would get an oil tanker moved for the shot. I was the person who could find parking where no one could find parking. And that's actually it. It's a lot more of an impressive story than the headline.
But you had the wisdom to know the difference, is what you're saying.
But I didn't.
At the time, you didn't.
At the time, I didn't. And so then it's like, you have to hand over control. You have to surrender, where it's like, I'm not God. Addiction, fundamentally, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of people, and most of those people are sober, so I've listened, would be this need for control, which fundamentally is a belief that you are God, almost. Like, not necessarily that you think you are God, but you behave in the world in such a way that you are expecting it to and making it revolve around yourself. Your whims, your wants, your needs. You think that you're the center of the universe, and
that you have control is what I'm understanding.
That you need it. So you're seeking that control. So, and the fact is you don't have control. So then there's this fundamental flaw where
there's a mismatch.
So I'm walking around thinking that I can't really exist unless I'm in control in a world that I don't have control over. It's another, like, I absolutely don't. And that's the beauty of it. And then I think you can take that philosophy to most things, where if you, like, when I ask people this, I find most people will say the best things that have ever happened to them appear to be chance. It's not something they created or forced. Maybe taking advantage of the good opportunities is. But it's like, it's serendipity, it's synchronicity, those kind of things.
But to come back, because I'm pulling you back to the start of this point you're making, which is the idea of addiction and getting over it.
Yeah.
And so where's the connection? I'm trying to grasp that with what you've just said.
It's interesting you said the word connection, because there's a phrase in recovery circles that says the opposite of addiction is connection.
Okay, so expand on that for me.
As someone who's autistic, that winds me up, because it's not the opposite on a definition level. But
well, let's not go there for the moment.
But if you are seeking something, so addicts are people that are seeking something. People say they try to find it in the bottom of a bottle. Yeah. Whatever. That's where the cross addiction that we mentioned comes in.
Got that. Yeah.
I think, in fact, I know fundamentally, I believe it in my bones, that it's about having something to live for. And it's different things. People often get sober for someone. You should really get sober for yourself, but actually most people don't.
But that's how it should be, surely.
It's how it should end up.
Certainly, the whole idea of self-belief, the mantra of self-belief, is the most important. Yeah. Because if you're relying on other people to support you,
that's the end game.
Then what's the point?
That's the end game. But I'm saying there's not, when people first arrive at rehab, they're not really saying they're doing it for them. They're doing it for their daughter. They're doing it for their wife, or whatever it is, their career even. And then at some point, and this is where the people, I think, sadly either relapse or worse.
In these 3 years, you go to the pub?
Yeah, I do.
And how does that work?
So I don't want to advise this, because people who are smarter and more expert than me in this, they would say that the phrase is, if you hang around at a barber shop long enough, you're going to get a haircut. So they don't necessarily advise drinking non-alcoholic beers. They don't necessarily advise going to the pub. People talk about like places where you're more likely to relapse. But for me, sitting at home alone is a place that's far worse for my spirit, far worse for my
But
soul.
you don't have to do either, is what I
Yeah.
say.
True. Although
But I said, first,
Yeah.
people, this is the London culture. We come back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And people of your age and would be going to the pub
Yeah.
on a Friday night.
I think so, yeah. I think it's also that actually, in all honesty, I really loved hospitality, and I really loved being a bartender, and I was a pretty good one. If you didn't mind a couple of drinks go missing, but I love the craft of it. I love the third space aspect, and that brings me on to kind of Bestie, the company that I recently started, where it's like I came back to London in August. And I met all these people who are wearing lots of different hats. I don't know, how many creatives do you know that only do one job or are only capable at one thing? How many writers do you know who can't also pick a color palette or tell you about framing or something like that? I met all these incredibly capable people, either being taken advantage of in the sense that they are forced to work 4 jobs but paid for 1 or something like that, or told that because they did one thing, so everyone can double up jobs wise or triple up, but why not pay them for it? But why not? It's about valuing opinion. It's like what happens in production now is that people will have an idea that's made in a conference room somewhere, and they'll take it to the people who are told to action it. I guess the way to say it is when you want to make a commercial, you'll go to an agency, right? When an agency wants to make a commercial, they'll come to us.
And what's so special about that? I understand that.
Yeah.
That's
And
what
then-
makes you special.
And so
And it's like, why can't everyone sit in a room? And then the third space thing, which is how we got onto this, is that there are so many people who are isolating, who are working from home, who are writing from home, who don't have that connection. I don't think it's any surprise that my generation, or maybe the generation just below me, around my generation, is the most anxious ever. I think that if we are going to be working as many hours as we're working, which doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon, I think that we should be really making those workplaces things that matter, and things that, especially when creating art, should be fulfilling. Why I think people often look at kind of the social impact of, like, when brands try and do something that's kind of like has a positive social impact, people go, oh yeah, that's just so they can get. Why can't we encourage that?
No,
Like,
fair
do you know-
point.
do you know
But
what I mean?
I again,
Yeah.
I'm coming back to you, Benji,
Yeah.
and I want, reflecting back, as I said, on the last few years of your young childhood onto to where you are
Yeah.
now, where you have been dry, you have been sober for 3 years.
Yeah.
You
Sorry,
have,
yeah.
you have your
Sorry,
own you have your own advertising agency,
Yeah.
which is different, which is very creative, in ways that other places are not. What kind of advice can you give us listeners, for those of us who might have lost our way, and are still struggling a little bit in trying to come out, or for those of us who are trying to support people who've lost their way
So
and help them out of that?
So that's something. The latter one is one I get asked the most, because I'm quite open about this. There's nothing you can do. Is the sad but
Is to help the other person. There's nothing I can
there's
do.
nothing you can do if someone is the closest thing that you can do is to. It sounds counterintuitive. It's to not tell them they're an alcoholic, not because it's not true, but because it's human nature to argue, and it's very, very hard to admit when it's time. Like, so at some point, they're gonna be ready, hopefully, and
if it
Okay,
gets
what
to that
about
point-
it's hard enough to come back.
But then what
They've had
about the
to- yeah.
person who's like you, who's 3 years clean now,
Yeah,
or even maybe only 1 year clean or 2 years clean,
yeah.
slightly less?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can help them to maintain that, to stay with it?
I think it's about honesty and vulnerability. I think it's whenever, and I actually find myself, they talk about that a dear friend and my psychiatrist, Dr. Peace, she said that for the rest of my life, if I ever have a therapist, they have to be trained in addiction, because the addict brain is so insidious and sneaks up on you all the time. And it does, and it sneaks up on me. And my way of dealing with that is by being so open about things that there's nowhere to hide. It's similar to like it was the Mark Twain thing about eating the frog or something like that, where the first thing, like the second I realize that I am avoiding a text message or an email or something like that, that's the point I know I need to check it. And it's the same when I feel things going wrong in my soul. So if you're struggling, if someone is struggling, there will be two instincts in their gut, and they'll know which one is the right one, and it's usually the harder one. And if I find myself losing my way, I double down. I double down on the things I know keep me sane, and the things I know, and I also hand over control. I guess it's like okay, cool, so what's this thing, what's stressing me out? And most of the time it's me not trusting someone with something. It's me trying to do every job, or it's me, and most people will know their own personal either character
defects
Sure.
or spiritual defects.
like that's kind of, it's like, don't lean into those bits, lean into the ones you love, and leave the house. Like, this one's a bit more of a personal thing. It's like, I sound like a boomer, in the sense of when people say, oh, just go hand out your CV, then you'll get a job. But I truly believe this. The more you leave
Leave the
Go and
house.
network.
not
That's
even
what you
just
said.
networking, just leave the house and chat to people. Like,
Chat to the
Talk to
guy on the
strangers.
bus.
chat to the guy on the bus, or don't, if you're not comfortable with that, go and sit in a cafe. Just watch, just absorb things that aren't your own self.
Without AirPods.
There's the morning pages where you're journaling, and you journal stream of consciousness, which gets, I think of it as a juice cleanse for the mind. Everything, it acknowledges every thought, which kind of ticks that box. And the other thing is, go, not with anyone else, go to a gallery. Just do something. Like, it's amazing growing up in London how little of it I've seen. I took a trip in January on a whim with a very dear friend of mine, who you're quite familiar with as well. And we were in Paris, and we were looking, we had very cheap tickets, and we were looking around galleries and stuff like that, and it was beautiful. There's beauty. I don't think there's anyone listening to this that doesn't have beauty near them. It may not be galleries, it may not be,
Whatever
If it's not galleries,
whatever
it's nature.
interests you, that's
Yeah,
what you
whatever-
say.
not even just what interests you, but just something that that can top up your tank. Do you know what I mean? That can fill up the tank of beauty. It could be nature, it could be, and yeah, maybe the opposite of addiction is connection. Maybe it is, because the fact is if you go to places you love and do things you love, you'll meet people you love and who love the same things.
Well
And
said.
That's
So
where you end up.
if I were to summarize, Benji, essentially what you're saying is that the message you're giving those people who are recovering alcoholics, recovering addicts, working on it, it's always going to be there. And it is really about being honest with yourself, you said.
yeah.
Taking the hard path, because there'll always be two choices. And it's so much easier to go down the easier path. But take the hard
I
path,
think
which
it's-
is the
yeah.
right path.
I think it's often the hard part. I don't know if you can.
It doesn't have to be, though.
Yeah, I think-
And embrace all the wonderful beauty that you appreciate, whether it's going to the cinema, going to the theatre,
Yeah.
going to a gallery, whatever you can afford
Yeah.
with your paper.
Go to a lake if there's a nice lake.
And just sit there and watch the
But
water.
I don't want to trivialize it though either. It's not like there are people.
But it's not, it's simple.
I think that's the answer for people who are struggling, is to connect, is to do the things that you know, because
What works for you.
If you're
even a month into recovery, you know which things keep you sober because you've done it, which things have got you through this month. The people who aren't there yet, stay strong and keep going, and there's people around you who love you, and that's really it. And I bet you that every person, even if their family's not speaking to them, even if they think they've burned every bridge, most people will have someone who will listen and someone who will help. And yeah, they say I guess the final thing is, people say that they say you'll eat shit for a year after you get sober. Do you know when a baby's crying, or when you're a small child or whatever, and they get properly hysterical and they're sobbing and they can't really breathe properly? For me, when that happened when I was like a really, really young child, the thing that would get me out of like the like like that, I would yawn. I don't know if that's the same. I've seen it in like other babies and stuff like that, but like after rehab, I would describe as that yawn, that brief respite. Is it respite or respite? That brief respite from the hysterics and hysteria and mania of addiction. And then it's like, okay, cool, this is everything I was avoiding. And if you're in that stage, keep going. Just keep going. This too shall pass. Whether it's good or whether it's bad, this too shall pass. And then it starts getting good. And then you're like, okay, cool. Wait, maybe I can do all the things that I wanted to do. And that's...
And on that note,
Yeah.
Benji Thomas,
We'll see.
thank you very much.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.